Unaware his poor wife secretly inherit a $750 billion fortune, he throw her out with her newborn after marrying his mistress. They say a woman's worth is measured by what she gives a man. Colonel Afolayan believed that. So when his wife gave him a daughter instead of a son, he measured her value at exactly 0, and threw her into a Lagos rainstorm with their 3-day-old baby, her body still bleeding from childbirth, her legs barely able to stand. His mistress watched from the doorway, smiling. His friends cheered him on. The neighbors pretended not to see. But here's what none of them saw. 72 hours earlier, that worthless wife had signed documents making her the sole heir to a $750 billion fortune. And the only reason she walked away into that rain without saying a word? She'd promised to keep it secret for 60 days. 60 days to see who loved her and who was using her. 60 days to watch her husband reveal exactly who he was. 60 days before she could show him that the woman he threw away like garbage owned everything he'd ever wanted. The ceiling fan stuttered overhead, its blades slicing humid air that smelled of old paper and Lagos exhaust. Zainab shifted in the plastic chair, her pregnant belly pressing against the edge of a desk that had seen better decades. The office walls wore peeling yellow paint like tired skin, and water stains mapped continents across the ceiling. But the document spread before her told a different story. Crisp European paper, red wax seals bearing a crest she'd only seen once, in a photograph her mother had burned. Martin Okonkwo sat across from her, his gray suit immaculate despite the heat, his fingers steepled beneath his chin like a man accustomed to delivering impossible news. Your grandfather, Chukwuma Afolayan, disappeared 40 years ago, he said, his voice carrying the particular precision of lawyers who measure truth in billable hours. The family believed he died poor in some forgotten village. They were wrong. Zainab's baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if protesting the absurdity of what came next. Cocoa trade, initially. The British needed suppliers they could trust, and your grandfather was patient, meticulous, willing to wait for premium prices while others sold in panic. He expanded into shipping, small vessels at first, then entire fleets. Port operations in Rotterdam, Accra, Sao Paulo. Sovereign bonds when military governments destabilized currencies. He built an empire so quietly that even his bankers didn't know the full scope until we consolidated the holdings after his death 6 months ago. Okonkwo slid a document across the desk. The number at the bottom made Zainab's vision blur. $750 billion. Matured assets, liquid holdings, real estate across 4 continents. You're the only living heir who can prove direct lineage. Your mother's birth certificate, your grandmother's marriage records. We've verified everything. It's yours, Miss Afolayan. All of it. The baby kicked again. Zainab's hands trembled as she reached for the paper, then pulled back as if the number might burn her. Why me? Why not? My mother had cousins, uncles. Dead, estranged, or disqualified by your grandfather's specific instructions. He wanted someone who carried your grandmother's name. Someone who understood patience. Okonkwo leaned forward, his expression softening into something almost human. But there's a condition. You must keep this inheritance secret for 60 days. Tell no one. Not your husband, not your friends, not family. Your grandfather was explicit in his will. He called it the test of true character. He wanted you to see who values you for yourself, not for what you can provide them. During this period, we'll manage the estate discreetly, begin training you on the holdings, prepare the transition. But you remain invisible until the machinery aligns. Zainab's throat tightened. She thought of Kunal at home, increasingly distant since learning the baby was a girl. Thought of Gloria's too frequent visits, her lingering touches on Kunal's arm. Thought of her grandmother's voice from childhood, weathered and wise. Patience is not weakness, child. It is strategy. The river waits for rain, but it always finds the sea. 60 days, she whispered. 60 days to observe, to understand, to see clearly. Okonkwo pushed a pen across the desk. After that, everything changes. But first, you must survive what your grandfather called the revelation of truth. Zainab's hand closed around the pen. The baby settled, as if holding its breath. Outside, Lagos traffic roared and horns blared and life continued, indifferent to the moment when everything split into before and after. She signed her name in careful letters, each stroke a bridge between the woman she'd been and the woman she'd have to become. The ink dried quickly in the heat. 60 days. She could survive anything for 60 days. Rain hammered the veranda like fists demanding entry, each drop exploding against corrugated zinc in rhythms that matched Zainab's racing heart. She stood barefoot on tiles still warm from the afternoon sun, her body a map of pain, the cesarean incision pulling with each breath, milk leaking through her blouse in wet circles that shamed her, legs trembling from exhaustion that went deeper than bone. Ada, 3 days old and already unwanted, whimpered against her chest with the particular cry of newborns who sense their mother's distress. Connell stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, backlit by the yellow glow of their sitting room. Behind him, Gloria sprawled across the leather sofa they'd saved 2 years to buy, her legs crossed with studied casualness, her silk dress clinging to curves Zainab's body would never recover. Gloria's nails, painted the deep red of fresh wounds, drummed against the armrest in barely concealed triumph. "You gave me a girl," Connell said, his voice carrying over the rain to where neighbors pretended not to listen behind curtained windows. "Not the son I need. Not the heir my family deserves. You're bad luck, Zainab. Dead weight I've been dragging since you got pregnant." The words landed like blows. Zainab clutched Ada tighter, feeling the baby's rabbit-fast heartbeat against her own. "Connell, please." "The doctor said I need 6 weeks to heal. Ada needs stability, warmth. I'm still bleeding." His laughter cut her off, sharp and performative. From inside, his friends joined in, Emeka and Femi, men she'd cooked for, men who'd called her sister, now braying like hyenas at a kill. "You hear that?" Connell called back to them. Still making demands. Still thinking she matters. Gloria rose from the sofa with fluid grace, her heels clicking across the floor as she glided to Connell's side. Her hand settled on his arm with possessive familiarity, diamonds catching light, the bracelet Zainab had admired at Gloria's birthday party, back when she'd believed they were friends. "Stop being dramatic, Zainab. You always do this, make everything about you. Connell and I have been planning this for months. We tried to wait until after the baby, to spare your feelings, but we can't keep living a lie. He deserves happiness. He deserves a woman who understands ambition." The betrayal was almost perfect in its cruelty. Months. They'd been planning this while Zainab was on bed rest, while complications threatened Ada's life, while she'd texted Gloria asking for prayers and received heart emojis in response. "My new life starts tonight," Connell announced, reaching inside to grab Zainab's single suitcase, the one she'd packed for the hospital, still containing maternity clothes and extra pads for bleeding. He tossed it onto the wet concrete where it landed with a splash that soaked through cheap fabric. "Gloria understands success. She's going places. You?" He gestured dismissively. "You're going nowhere. You always were." The rain intensified, turning the world into blurred watercolors. Zainab bent carefully, every movement agony, and lifted the suitcase. Ada's cries grew louder, more desperate. Through the downpour, she could see curtains twitching, Mrs. Adeyemi's face pressed against glass, quickly disappearing when their eyes met. She walked. Each step sent lightning through her incision. 57 days, she thought, counting down the silence like a prayer. 57 days until they learn what they've thrown away. At the roadside clinic 3 blocks distant, the night matron looked up from her desk as Zainab stumbled through the door, soaked and shaking. Recognition flickered across her weathered face. Afilan? That name. Months ago, a lawyer came asking after an Afilan woman. Had documents, said it was urgent family business. Zainab said nothing. Just held Ada closer and waited for the shaking to stop. 57 days remained. The guest house in Suralere had clean sheets and running water, Luxury Zainab had feared she'd lost forever that rain-soaked night. The trust paid in cash through intermediaries, a distant cousin's generosity, the landlady was told, and asked no questions about the young mother who spent hours nursing her baby by the window, watching Lagos remake itself each morning. Ada was thriving now, her cries stronger, her grip fierce, when she latched onto Zainab's finger. The cesarean incision was healing slowly, pink tissue knitting itself back together like her resolve. Across the city, Kunal's world was expanding in ways he attributed entirely to his own brilliance. His Instagram feed, which Zainab watched from a borrowed phone like studying an opponent's playbook, documented his ascent in carefully curated squares. Kunal at networking events, hand extended in confident greeting. Kunal and Gloria at restaurant openings, her head on his shoulder, both of them glossy with success. Kunal signing documents in sleek bank offices, the caption reading, "Fortune favors the bold. New partnerships, new horizons. Hashtag entrepreneur, hashtag Lagos hustle, hashtag level up." What the photos didn't show. The banks approving his loans were subsidiaries of holding companies controlled by Afolayan Trust. The investors he courted worked for firms where Okonkwo's people sat on boards, taking notes. The warehouse space he'd just leased for his import business? Owned by a property group that reported quarterly to trustees who reported to Zainab. Martin Okonkwo visited every Wednesday afternoon, arriving in an unremarkable Toyota that wouldn't draw attention, carrying folders that detailed Kunal's movements with the precision of a doctoral thesis. He sat across from Zainab at the small table while Ada slept, his finger tracing through financial reports like a professor explaining basic arithmetic. Last week, he borrowed 12 million naira from United Capital Bank to purchase inventory. Chinese electronics, he's positioning himself as a tech importer. The loan was approved in 48 hours, exceptional speed. He thinks it's because his business plan impressed them. Okonkwo's smile was thin as paper. The truth is United Capital is 73% owned by Thornton Maritime Holdings, which is wholly owned by your trust. We approved it because we want to see exactly how deep he'll dig. Zainab shifted Ada to her other shoulder, feeling the baby's warm breath against her neck. What else? He's meeting with investors from Apex Ventures next week, seeking seed funding for expansion. Apex is controlled by interests your grandfather acquired in 2019. He's also applied for credit lines from 3 additional institutions, all connected to the estate in ways he hasn't researched. Okonkwo pulled out another document. We're now acquiring interests in 17 firms he's either partnering with or targeting for deals. He's essentially building his empire on your foundation, stone by stone, without knowing the ground beneath him belongs to you. Through the window, Lagos traffic roared, Okadas weaving through gridlock, hawkers calling out their wares, the city's relentless hustle providing soundtrack to invisible power moving beneath the surface. There's more, Okonkwo continued, his voice carefully neutral. He's been telling associates about his worthless ex-wife, who couldn't even give him a proper child. Gloria encourages it, apparently finds it entertaining. They're planning a wedding for next month. Rushed, but they want to make a statement. He paused. Every word is being documented by people he thinks are friends. Zainab was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles on Ada's back. When she spoke, her voice carried the same steady calm her grandmother used when teaching lessons meant to last lifetimes. I don't want destruction, Mr. Okonkwo. I want truth. Let him build. Let him boast. Let him think he's escaped consequences. And when the time comes, I want him to understand exactly what he threw away, not because I destroyed him, but because he'll see clearly what he destroyed himself. Okonkwo nodded slowly. Your grandfather would have approved. He always said the best lessons are the ones people teach themselves. Outside, the city continued its indifferent dance. 34 days remained. The invitation arrived in embossed gold lettering on cream cardstock that whispered wealth with every fiber. Eco-Atlantic Business Summit. Visionaries shaping Africa's future. Kunal held it like a prophet clutching divine revelation, his thumb tracing over his name. Mr. Kunal Afolayan, CEO, ka imports and technology. As if repetition might make the title more real. This was it. The summit where deals worth billions were brokered over champagne, where handshakes meant more than contracts, where Lagos elite separated those destined for greatness from those destined to remain small. He bought a suit he couldn't afford, charcoal Tom Ford, tailored to hide the softness around his middle, purchased on a credit card from a bank that had approved his application with suspicious ease. The tailor assured him he looked like new money trying to become old money, which Connell took as the highest compliment. Gloria selected his tie, a burgundy silk that matched her own dress, the two of them coordinating like they'd been doing this for decades instead of months. The morning of the summit, Connell practiced his pitch in the mirror while Gloria filmed him for her Instagram story. Confidence, she coached, adjusting her cleavage in a dress that cost more than Zainab's monthly allowance ever had. You're not asking for opportunities, you're offering them. You're the commodity they need. Television cameras line the entrance to Eco Atlantic's gleaming convention center, all glass and steel rising from reclaimed land where ocean had been just years before a monument to the audacity of turning water into wealth. Connell stepped from the hired Mercedes with Gloria on his arm, both of them smiling like they'd already won. Journalists gravitated toward them with that predatory instinct for new money trying to look established. Mr. Afolayan, tell us about your expansion plans, a reporter from Business Day asked, thrusting a microphone toward him. Connell's smile widened. He'd rehearsed this answer until it sounded spontaneous. We're scaling rapidly. Import operations expanding into tech distribution, partnerships across West Africa, possibly East Africa by Q3. The key is innovation and focus. You can't build an empire while carrying dead weight. You have to be willing to leave behind distractions, people who don't understand the vision. Gloria laughed, too loud, too rehearsed, and squeezed his arm. The camera caught it all. The carefully constructed image of power coupling with ambition, beauty validating success. What the cameras didn't catch, inside the convention center's operations room, Okonkwo's assistant delivered a sealed envelope to the summit director. The director's face went carefully blank as he read, then called security with instructions delivered in the particular tone reserved for situations requiring delicacy. Mr. Connell Afolayan is to be allowed entry, the director said quietly. But under no circumstances is he to access the VIP lounge or private investor sessions. His credentials are flagged for review by Z. Afolayan Trust, principal stakeholder in 4 of our platinum sponsors. If he asks why, tell him there's been a scheduling conflict. Handle it professionally. We don't want scenes. The security chief nodded, already speaking into his radio in code that meant situation requires monitoring. Outside, Connell was still talking to cameras, explaining how he'd built everything from nothing, how success belonged to those bold enough to seize it, how the future belonged to men who understood that sentimentality was the enemy of progress. He used the word strategic 6 times in 2 minutes. He mentioned leaving behind personal complications with a knowing look that made Gloria laugh again. Behind him, through those gleaming glass doors, his future was already collapsing. He just didn't know it yet. The cameras kept rolling, preserving every confident word, every proud gesture, every casual cruelty disguised as business wisdom. Evidence for a trial that had already reached its verdict. Gloria adjusted her dress. Connell straightened his tie. Together, they walked toward doors that would open to humiliation dressed as honor. 29 days remained, but Connell's ascent had already ended. He was just still climbing through the air, not yet understanding that the ground had fallen away beneath him. The summit hall's air conditioning hummed against Lagos heat, but Connell felt nothing except the electric certainty of arrival. He straightened his Tom Ford jacket, Gloria's hand warm on his arm as they approached the entrance where other entrepreneurs clustered like satellites around power. Television lights painted everything gold. This was his moment. The validation he'd worked toward, the proof that cutting away dead weight had been the right strategic move. Security stopped them at the threshold. Mr. Afolayan, please wait here. There's been a development with your company's credentials. Connell's smile froze. Development? I was personally invited. Check your list again. The guard's face remained professionally blank, but something shifted in his eyes. Not hostility, but careful distance, the look of a man who'd received instructions from someone far above Connell's pay grade. Sir, if you could just step aside while we verify. Verify what? Gloria's voice pitched high, drawing attention. Do you know who we are? The screens mounted throughout the hall flickered. Connell glanced up, expecting to see the summit's sponsor logos cycling through their rotation. Instead, a single name appeared in elegant script. Z. Affilian Trust, Principal Investor. The name meant nothing to him. He'd never bothered learning who funded what. He'd been too focused on his own climb to care about invisible stakeholders. But around him, the room's temperature changed. Conversations died. Heads turned toward the main doors with something that looked like reverence. The doors opened. Zainab walked through them. Not Zainab as he'd last seen her. Broken, bleeding, stumbling into rain. This Zainab moved with the measured grace of someone who'd learned to carry weight no one else could see. She wore simple attire, no designer labels or ostentatious jewelry, but the fabric whispered quality in a language only old money spoke. A nurse followed, cradling Ada. The daughter he'd called worthless, sleeping peacefully against white linen. Connell's brain rejected the image, tried to force it into familiar categories. Coincidence.
Mistake.
Hallucination brought on by stress and too much coffee. But Zainab took her seat among the elders and bankers at the head table, and they bowed their heads slightly as she passed. The air rearranged itself around her presence. Martin Okonkwo stood, the lawyer Connell had never met, never imagined existed in Zainab's world. His voice carried the particular precision of men who controlled empires from behind curtains. Mr. Affilian, the Z. Affilian Trust has acquired controlling interests in 7 firms your company depends on. United Capital Bank, where you secured your primary loan. Apex Ventures, whose seed funding you're courting. The Warehouse Consortium you just signed with. All subsidiaries or controlled entities of the trust. The words landed like stones thrown into still water, ripples spreading outward through Connell's understanding. His loans, his partnerships, his careful negotiations, all built on ground that belonged to someone else. Your debts are legitimate, Okonkwo continued, his tone neither cruel nor kind, simply factual, the voice of arithmetic rendering its verdict. The loans you secured were guaranteed by institutions we control. You've been building your empire on a foundation that was never yours. Whispers spread through the hall like fire through dry grass. Cameras swiveled. Connell tried to speak, started 3 different sentences that collapsed under their own weight. How could he explain? What defense existed against mathematics? He'd thrown away his wife, celebrated her departure, built his success story on the narrative of cutting loose what dragged him down. And all along, she'd been the ground beneath his feet. Security moved forward, not roughly, but with the firm inevitability of men executing instructions they'd memorized. Not arrest, not violence, simply removal, the quiet erasure of someone who'd misunderstood the room's geometry. As they escorted him toward the side exit, Connell looked back once. Zainab sat composed among the elders, Ada still sleeping against the nurse's shoulder. She didn't watch him go.
Didn't need to.
The revelation was complete. He'd been seen, measured, and found precisely as substantial as he'd always been, a man who mistook cruelty for strength, who'd thrown away what he couldn't value because he'd never learned to see past surfaces. The doors closed behind him. Inside, the summit continued. Outside, Connell stood in the service corridor where the real work of power happened, invisible to those who only saw the stage. The settlement documents arrived on Thursday morning, delivered by courier to the modest apartment Connell had moved into after Gloria disappeared. She'd left Lagos 3 days after the summit, her departure coinciding precisely with news reports about financial irregularities in her previous employment, falsified expense reports, redirected client funds, small-scale fraud that had gone unnoticed until someone with resources decided to look closely. Kunal suspected Zainab's hand in the timing, but he had no proof, and by then he understood that proof was a luxury afforded only to those with power to use it. His friends had evaporated like morning mist. Emeka and Femi, who'd laughed when he threw Zainab into the rain, now screened his calls. The business contacts who'd returned his emails within hours suddenly took days to respond, then stopped responding altogether. Lagos' professional class had remarkable instincts for survival. They could smell a sinking ship from across the lagoon. The settlement was more merciful than he deserved. Zainab had paid his personal debts in full, protecting the employees who depended on his company for their livelihoods. The warehouse lease was transferred to their names, ensuring they could continue operations. But Kunal himself was permanently barred from leadership positions in any firm where the Afalayan Trust held influence. Which, as Okonkwo's accompanying letter detailed with careful precision, included most of the companies he'd been courting for partnerships or investment. He was free to work, free to live, just not free to lead, to command, to occupy the positions of power he'd spent years climbing toward. The private meeting happened in Okonkwo's office, the same peeling paint space where Zainab had signed her inheritance papers. She sat across from Kunal with Ada in her arms, the baby awake now and watching the ceiling fan with fascinated concentration. Kunal couldn't look at his daughter without feeling something collapse inside his chest. "I didn't do this for revenge," Zainab said, her voice carrying the same steady calm he remembered from their early days together, before he'd learned to mistake her quietness for weakness. "I did it so you'd understand that people have value you can't see. That cruelty has consequences. That dignity survives storms, even when everything else is stripped away." Kunal tried to speak, but shame had turned his tongue to stone. Finally, he managed, "What do I do now?" Zainab shifted Ada to her other shoulder, the gesture so practiced and natural it highlighted everything he'd missed. All the nights he'd slept while she fed their daughter, all the moments he'd dismissed as unimportant because they didn't advance his ambitions. "You learn," she answered. "You understand that strength isn't what you thought it was. That success built on contempt for others is just a taller place to fall from. Or you don't learn. You repeat the same patterns with different people until there's nothing left of you but bitterness and regret. That's your choice, Kunal. It always was." She stood, and he realized this was goodbye. Not the explosive ending he'd forced on her that rain-soaked night, but something quieter and more final. She was releasing him, not into punishment, but into the consequences of his own character. "Ada will know her father if you want that," Zainab said from the doorway. "But she'll know him as he actually is, not as he pretends to be. Truth is the only inheritance I'm interested in giving her."
The door closed.
Kunal sat alone in the office where his wife had become someone he'd never bothered to see, surrounded by documents that proved mercy could cut deeper than any revenge. The compound sat where it had always sat, shaded by mango trees whose roots remembered floods from decades past. Zainab's grandmother emerged from the kitchen house as the car pulled up, wiping her hands on fabric printed with indigo patterns that predated Nigeria itself. She moved slowly now, age settling into her bones like sediment, but her eyes remained sharp, the kind of sharpness that saw through pretense to the truth beneath. "You've come home," the old woman said, not as question but confirmation. She'd known somehow, the way she always knew when family needed the river's wisdom. Zainab had told her nothing about the inheritance, only that she was managing some family matters after the collapse of her marriage. Her grandmother had asked no questions, understanding that some stories revealed themselves in their own time. Now she reached for Ada, lifting the baby with practiced hands that had delivered half the village's children over 5 decades. "This one will grow strong," she murmured, studying Ada's face with the concentration of someone reading ancient text. "She has her great-great-grandfather's eyes. Did you know that? Chukwuma had eyes like this, old eyes, even when he was young. He was a man who knew when to speak and when to hold his tongue. Knew that silence could be sharper than any blade." Zainab felt something settle in her chest, a confirmation she hadn't known she needed. "Grandmother, I need to tell you something." about grandfather, about what he left behind. They sat beneath the largest mango tree, its branches heavy with fruit that would ripen in weeks. Zainab explained everything: the inheritance, the waiting period, Kunnal's betrayal and revelation, the power she now held. Her grandmother listened without interruption, occasionally adjusting Ada against her shoulder when the baby stirred. When Zainab finished, the old woman was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "He came to see me, 2 years before he died. Brought papers for me to sign, said he was putting things in order. Asked about you, whether you had your grandmother's spirit or your mother's pain. I told him you had both, that the strongest people always do." Zainab's throat tightened. "I want to build something here. A maternal care center and girls' scholarship fund, both named after Ada. Ada House, where daughters are treasured. Prenatal care, education, economic support for mothers. Everything I needed when Kunnal threw us out. Everything women in these villages have never had access to." Her grandmother's hand found hers, papery skin warm in the afternoon heat. "Your grandfather would approve. He always said wealth means nothing unless it builds something that lasts longer than the person who built it. He saw what happened to his own daughter, your mother, how poverty trapped her with a cruel man. He tried to help, but his methods were too heavy, too controlling. With you, he gave you the resources and the wisdom to choose your own path." The river Niger flowed beyond the compound walls, its surface catching light like scattered coins. Zainab thought about her journey. From that rain-soaked veranda to a homeless shelter to this moment beneath mango trees, holding power she'd never imagined and purpose she discovered in darkness. "Will you help me?" she asked. "Help me build something that honors what you taught me about patience and dignity. Something that proves daughters are treasures, not disappointments." Her grandmother smiled, and in that smile Zainab saw generations of women who'd survived floods and droughts and men who mistook cruelty for strength. "Child, I've been waiting my whole life to help build exactly that." The ribbon stretched across Ada House's entrance like a promise kept. Zainab stood before the gathered crowd, mothers with babies strapped to their backs, daughters in school uniforms borrowed for the occasion, elders who remembered when Chukwuma Afolayan had walked these same roads buying cocoa at fair prices while other traders cheated farmers blind. The building rose behind her, all clean lines and welcoming spaces, solar panels catching afternoon sun, windows designed to let in light and river Niger breezes. Ada sat on her hip, 6 months old now and thriving, her legs kicking with the restless energy of babies who discovered movement. The child wore traditional fabric printed with her great-great-grandfather's crest, the cocoa pod and river wave that had marked his shipping containers decades ago. "This center exists because someone once threw us away thinking we were worthless," Zainab said, her voice carrying across the compound without need for amplification. The crowd had gone quiet, listening with the intensity of people who understood that some stories contained lessons meant to last. But worth isn't determined by those who can't see it. It's revealed by what we build from the ruins. Ada House stands here not as monument to my suffering, but as proof that dignity survives storms. That patience is strategy. That daughters are treasures, not disappointments to be discarded. An elder stepped forward, a woman who'd helped deliver Zainab's mother 40 years ago, who remembered Chukwuma before he vanished into his empire. "Your grandfather would weep to see this," she said, her voice cracking. "He carried such guilt about your mother, about not knowing how to help her without controlling her. You've done what he couldn't. You've turned pain into healing." The ribbon fell. Mothers surged forward, eager to see the prenatal care rooms, the library stocked with books in 3 languages, the vocational training center with sewing machines and computers, the child care facility where daughters could be safe while their mothers learned skills that would lift families from poverty's grip. News cameras captured everything. By evening, the story had spread, not as spectacle, but as possibility. Zainab became known not for her wealth, which she mentioned rarely, but for her wisdom and purpose. Invitations arrived daily. Corporate boards, philanthropic councils, government advisory committees. She accepted selectively, always asking the same question: will this empower women and children, or just make powerful people feel better about themselves? In Lagos, Kunal sat in a small office where he managed inventory for a logistics company. The job had appeared mysteriously after his public humiliation, modest but stable, with benefits that covered basic expenses. He'd learned not to ask questions about fortune that seemed too convenient. The television in the break room showed Ada House's opening. He watched Zainab speak, watched her hold the daughter he'd called worthless, and felt something crack open inside his chest, not quite redemption, but the beginning of understanding. She'd kept her promise. She'd provided basic dignity even to the man who denied her any. The mercy cut deeper than punishment ever could, because it forced him to see what he'd destroyed, not just a marriage, but the possibility of being part of something larger than his own ambition. Zainab's face filled the screen, Ada laughing in her arms. For the first time since that rain-soaked night, Kunal understood what he'd thrown away. Not money, not status, but the chance to be remembered as someone who built rather than destroyed, who treasured rather than discarded. The realization arrived too late to change anything, which was perhaps the point. Some lessons only take root in ruins. Sunlight poured through Ada House's corridors like liquid gold, illuminating mothers nursing their babies in rocking chairs positioned to catch the river Niger breeze. In the library, girls bent over textbooks with the fierce concentration of those who understood education as escape route rather than abstraction. Under the mango trees her grandmother had helped plant during construction, elders shared stories that wove past into present, teaching younger women the old strategies for survival that predated any government program or charitable foundation. Ada toddled beside Zainab now, 18 months old and fascinated by everything, especially the butterflies that danced through the compound's gardens. She chased them with unsteady steps, laughing when they eluded her grasp, undeterred by failure because she hadn't yet learned that some people measured worth by what you caught rather than by the joy in trying. A young woman appeared at the entrance, hesitant, her body language screaming recent trauma. She carried nothing but a small bag and wore clothes that had been expensive once but were now rumpled from sleeping in them. Zainab recognized the look, had worn it herself not so long ago. "I heard you help people like me," the woman whispered, voice breaking on the last word. Zainab took her hand, feeling its tremor, remembering her own hands shaking as she'd signed inheritance papers while her world collapsed. "You're not people like you," she said gently. "You're someone with dignity, strength, and a story that isn't finished. Let's write the next chapter together." She led the woman inside, toward the intake coordinator who would assess needs and assign resources, toward the beginning of whatever transformation awaited. Ada followed, still chasing butterflies, still laughing. Later, as evening settled over the compound and mothers gathered their children for the night, Zainab stood at the entrance, watching the river Niger catch dying light. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory, layered now with her own understanding, ready to be passed forward to the next generation of daughters who would need its wisdom. "My grandfather taught me that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. That patience isn't surrender, it's power held in reserve. That dignity always finds its way home, even if the journey breaks you first." Kunal thought throwing us away would free him. Instead, it freed me. Freed me from the illusion that my worth depended on his recognition, that my dignity required his permission to exist. And now, every daughter who walks through these doors will know what I learned in the rain. You are never as powerless as those who hurt you need to believe. Your worth exists whether they see it or not. It existed when I walked through storms with Ada in my arms. It existed in that homeless shelter. It exists in every mother who's been told she's worthless because she didn't produce the child someone else demanded. Someday, if you hold onto your dignity long enough, if you remember that patience is strategy and silence can be sharper than any blade, the world will kneel before the truth it tried to discard.
Not because you forced it to,
but because truth has weight that fiction can never match, and dignity has foundations that cruelty cannot shake. Ada tugged at her mother's hand, ready for dinner, ready for stories, ready for whatever came next with the fearless certainty of children who'd been treasured from birth. Zainab lifted her daughter, feeling the solid weight of future pressed against her chest, and walked back into the house they'd built from ruins, proof that some inheritances can't be measured in currency, only in the lives they transform and the daughters they teach to stand.